Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Daniel Pontefract, in the house, my good pal, Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin, welcome to the show on the other side of the mic with a brand new, fabulous book. Short bio about you, my friend, for those that may not know about you. Flexible leadership indeed. And then we'll get right into it. So, Kevin, you're a world-renowned leadership expert, a best-selling multi-time author, and the Chief Potential Officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group. It's a leadership and learning consulting firm that you founded about 30 years ago in 1990.
Hence the name.
Yeah, well, yeah. You've got 3 decades of experience plus. You dedicated your career to helping organization teams and individuals unleash their full potential. As I said, you've authored or co-authored nearly 20 books, including Remarkable Leadership, a bang-on, spot-on, awesome book, From Bud to Boss, The Long Distance Leader, it goes on. You've been recognized twice by Inc. as one of the top 100 leadership and management experts in the world. Your insights have made a significant impact on people like me and other leaders globally. Beyond the professional endeavors, Kevin, of course, you're a proud husband and father, avid reader, collector of antique John Deere tractors, holding a bunch of degrees, and the new book, Flexible Leadership, Navigating Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. Kevin, welcome to Leadership Now. Okay, so as I read the book, I'm thinking this argument that you have about flexibility, adaptability, intention. And so let's start right there. What's this misunderstood aspect of intentional leadership, and why is it such a crux in the book itself? Let's go there.
Well, listen, if we just do what our habit tells us, if we just do what we're comfortable with, if we just do what the leadership style assessment we took says, then there is no intention, right?
Yeah.
We're on automatic pilot. Now, by the way, some of those automatic choices might be fine, right? Some of them might even be excellent.
Yeah.
They're not likely all going to be. And so I was talking to someone the other day, and he said, Kevin, I think your book ultimately is about choice. And we can't get to choice until we have intention, right? So I think it's important for us to realize as leaders that that the world is not a black and white place. It's not an either or place. And that means that we're going to have to think carefully about the situation we're in to decide what's the best approach, or what's the range of best approaches we could take, as opposed to just taking an automatic response.
Okay, so let me play back some of your words from the book, because I think this actually segues nicely. So you write, when we label ourselves as one type of leader because we have been told to, or because we took an assessment, or consider a situation from only one perspective or lens, we begin to look for the right answer. What if we looked for best answers rather than right answers? This speaks to your point, I think, about choice. And we'll get into assessments, by the way, but further elaborate on your line of thinking there.
Well, and so, there's right answers, which we were taught in school to come up with. 2 + 2, right? Christopher Columbus landed in America in, right? Here's how photosynthesis works. Don't ask me to do that third one. I can do the first 2. The point is, like, we were brought up to be able to come up with right answers. And then we went into work, And there were more sorts of right answers. There were policies, there were procedures, there were processes, which were ways to define the right way or the way we do it here, right?
Mhm.
And then we got promoted. And we got promoted because we were really good at stuff, including probably having a lot of pretty good or right answers. So we sit here as leaders, and why wouldn't we want to lean into the right answer? Why, like everything in our life has led us to, it ought to be, well, there's a right answer. And what ends up happening is it ends up being my answer is the right answer. And I'm suggesting that in a world of uncertainty and complexity, that oftentimes trying to find the right answer or assuming we have the right answer will not be the most effective. And that really what we ought to be thinking about in some cases, not all, some cases is what are the range of options, plausible, possible things we can consider that might get us a better shot at success.
So let's as the young kids say, double click on that one there, Kevin, my friend. And when you're taking a sledgehammer to personality labels, leadership assessments, I thought, and I'm being cheeky, of course, Kevin, I thought I was an ENTJ. I thought I was an extrovert, intuitive, thoughtful, judgmental person. But what I'm hearing you say, and in the book, you basically are saying, actually, whether it's DISC or Strengths Finders or MBTI, we need to be fluid. We need to have sort of pendulum thinking. We need to back to choice, right? If the situation calls for X, well, maybe it does deserve X, but if we take a step back, we might want to apply Y because that's what the situation calls for. Now, that habitual kind of leadership behavior that we've been programmed to be because of assessments, et cetera, can exacerbate actually terrible leadership. So, what's
Yeah.
your prognosis and then antidote?
Well, so the first thing is I don't have a problem with any of those tools. Like we actually have a DISC assessment that we sell. Like there's nothing wrong with those tools until we overuse them. Here's my analogy. You said earlier a little bit about my very strange hobby. I grew up on a farm. I collect antique tractors, full size, real tractors. And my wife said they take a lot of space. So I said, well, maybe I'll buy the toys. And I won't grab one because I don't want to get it off the camera, but I could go back here and I could pull one out and I could bring it over to you. This toy is older than I am, and it's a toy that matches one of the tractors that I own. Let me just use this as an example. So
Okay.
I'm going to hold my hand. If you're not watching, it doesn't matter. But if you're watching, I'm holding my hands like the size of a toy tractor. It's a model of the real thing. It is not the real thing. It is necessarily simplified compared to the real thing, and it's useful to help us understand the real thing. It's not the real thing, and that's exactly what any other model is. It's simplified so we can get our arms around it, and it's helpful because we can get our arms around it, but it's not the real thing. So we have taken nuance out of human behavior to give ourselves a model, which
Mhm.
is helpful until then we take more of the nuance out by saying, I am an ENFP, right? I have these three strengths. So
Right.
the point is, and even when we teach people like communication skills and use DISC to help do it, we don't really focus on who you are. We focus on understand the model so you can understand how to flex to communicate more effectively with others. Knowing something about ourselves here is useful as long as we don't make it our identity. It's a place. It helps us understand what our natural tendencies are, in part so we can be intentional about not staying in them.
Well, okay. So you're segueing nicely again to your own book, which is just fantastic. And you present
I have
uh,
no
the
idea what questions you're going to ask, Dan. I'm just talking. If it happens to segue, then we're good.
maybe it's our relationship. We're copacetically leadership people. But no, you bring up flexors or the concept of flexors and how difficult it can be for leaders to flex because they get pigeonholed in their brain, in their behavior, their past experience of being, well, I need to be this type of ask person versus a tell, or, I'm a people person versus an outcome. And, some people are pigeonholed, oh, look, they execute all the time, but they don't care about people's feelings. So this natural bias to be at one end of the flexor spectrum is what you're debunking in the book, which I love, by the way. So tell us a bit about flexors and sort of what people can learn from being more flexible.
Yeah, so the idea of a flexor is that we do have a continuum, right? There's a continuum of approaches within that flexor, and you identified several of them. So let's just take one that you didn't identify, just because, right? So there are leaders that lead for compliance. Man, if I can get them to say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, boss, that's all I need.
Yeah.
Right. And there are leaders who say, well, no, I want commitment. I want engagement. I want all of those things that people like Dan and Kevin write about. Like, I want that. And so I would say that's a flexor. It's the compliance commitment flexor. And my point would be that either end, at the far extremes of that, there's seldom the best answer, that the right answer is somewhere in the middle. Now, I would also say that I've asked hundreds, literally hundreds of leaders, would you rather lead for compliance or commitment? And most everyone will say, I want to lead for commitment. And I would say, awesome that you want to lean in that direction. But the reality of all of our friends that do employee engagement surveys and stuff would say that that might be what we want, but that's not what we're getting. Right. We're getting an awful lot of mere compliance. I'm stay here because I've got to get a paycheck. And that's about all. But here's the real point. The real point is neither one of those are always the right answer. And whichever way you lean, you need to know where your starting point is. But the real question is, based on the context of the situation, where should I be dialing that or leaning on that spectrum in this moment? Sometimes all you need is for people to say, that works for me, boss. And if you're going to lean all the way into commitment, then you're going to spend a bunch of time and you're going to frustrate people when all they wanted is an answer. And so even if we might say that in general, as leaders, we ought to be generally leaning toward more commitment, that doesn't mean every time, every minute. That's that even the best answer.
Well, it does. One of the pieces you write about is how two truths can happen almost at the same time. Two things can be true at the same time, like flexibility and consistency. You say that those can coexist.
Yeah, and so in fact, I would say that with all these flexors, right? And so think about them. We've talked about it as a continuum. Think of it also as a tension. There's a tension here, right? Yeah. And both can be true. Can look at a tree. A tree is absolutely consistent, stable, not going anywhere. And it's also flexible. And if it's not flexible, it's not going to be standing there very long. But if it's not firmly rooted, it can't be flexible. Like there's a tension. Both are true. And both need to be true for us as a leader, because there are things we ought to be rooted in, like our values and our principles and the mission of our organization and all of those things. Like that's what holds us firm. And those things matter a lot. And yet we have to be flexible on how we get those things accomplished.
So I'm thinking to myself, if I'm a leader and I thought I knew what it meant to lead, I'm having an existential crisis after reading your book, because the words that you write, for example, quote, it means that being flexible is harder because it urges us to look for best or even possible answers for the situation, not right answers, nor does it mean we should simply lean into, quote, who we are, end quote. So I thought I knew what I was doing as a leader, Kevin. And now you're saying, actually, I want you to take a step back and think about these tensions of the flexors. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm with you. You have me at hello. But I'm talking about the leaders out there who think they know what it means to lead. And you're saying, hold my beer.
Well, I would say it's and, right? Like it goes back to what we were just saying. It's not or, it's and. And so I'm not asking to throw everything out that you know. And in fact, if you're listening to this, you're probably in a select group of people that are probably a little more enlightened in general. Or you are trying to learn to be more effective. I mean, you're a self-selected group that you are a part of, that you're listening. You are a part of a self-selected group because you're choosing to listen to Dan. So here's what I would say. What I'm saying, I think it goes back to what this other friend of mine said today, Kevin, this book's about choice. And I'm suggesting that we need to continue to think about the choices that we make. I think all of us would say or could recognize some version of the Zen idea that I'm going to butcher here, right? But it goes along these lines. Like to the beginner, there are many options. To the expert, there are few.
Mm.
Remain a beginner. And what I'm suggesting here is don't forget everything you know, but don't assume you know it all. And because when we know it all, excuse me, when we are expert, even if it's in our own mind, then there's no need to think about other options. Like I know what to do. And as humans, we have this amazing ability to recognize patterns, which is one of the reasons why all those models are helpful, right? Like we
Yeah.
can recognize patterns. And so then we dial in, got it. This looks like these 12 times, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just suggesting, like, does this really look like those 12 times? Or does it just look like what you hope this thing is rather than what it really is? Because the world is far less clear than it was 30 years ago
Well,
when I started.
it's like we rehearsed this, and of course we didn't, because I'm just
We
springing.
absolutely didn't.
I'm just springing stuff on you. But now we're actually you're bringing up the concepts of complexity and chaos because leadership isn't easy. But some people think, oh, it's just you're just going to roll through things and it's going to be fine. Everything's timid, everything's even keel. But you say in the book again, I nodded a lot as I went through the book.
That's good. That makes me feel really good, Dan.
Well, I agree with the fact that you say people rely on their best practices or quote the best practices of leadership. And that only takes you so far when the tsunami hits or there's a pandemic or we just got acquired. OMG, what am I going to do with my unit? Now I've got 26 new people that I've got to figure out how to interweave and so on and so forth. So this whole notion that developing good enough solutions rather than kind of predefined best practices and employing those predefined best practices over and over again. What's how do you define that and where's the exemplar? Like tell me a bit about something you've seen where either someone or individuals has done it.
Yeah. So first of all, we're heading into something of a framework that I'm guessing you're going to want me to talk more about in a minute. And I'll let you wait to ask that question. But here's what I would say. Like before I started my company, I worked at Chevron, and Chevron was and is a fine organization. I learned a lot there. I owe a lot to what I learned in my 8+ years at Chevron. And while I was there, so we're talking mid 80s to early 90s, right? And one of the things, like it was the professed goal of the organization was to be better than the best. And the way to lean into that was to identify, find, and use best practices. And and the organization made all sorts of progress in all sorts of ways using that approach. That's fine when we sort of know what the parameters are. That's fine when we know what the causes and effects are. That's fine when know when we have people that know sort of what's worked. But I've also now used the word fine 3 times, and you used the word fine earlier. And if you are married or have a significant other and they say it's fine, you tell me, is it perfect? It is not. Fine is like, well, all right. And like if you're listening to this, you don't want to be a all right leader. That's not what you're after. So maybe we can survive-ish in times of more turbulence, in times of what I would call complication or complexity, even if things are fine. But the reality is the world is more uncertain. We don't know what all those cause and effects are. We don't have all of the perspectives that we need, all of the expertise that we need. And so if we recognize that, then we have to start to say, like, if I sat you down in the wilderness and said, get out of here, the first thing you'd ask me for is a map. And
Mhm.
so one of the things we do in the book is try to give you a map to help you think about the terrain, which isn't always just clear, where the best practices and the past experience will reign and get us great results.
I always say if things are fine, then we're finished because the word fin in French is Fin. So you can't say fine because you're finished, Kevin. You can use that. That's my Canadian French coming into you.
I like that. And it
Um,
also makes me think about, like, if you were sanding some wood, right? And when it's really fine, it is finished. There's nothing more left to do
exactly.
there. And that's
Yeah.
not, I think, anyone who's listening to us, you're not thinking about leading that way, or you wouldn't be here.
Also, our better halves are certainly not thinking that, are they? Okay, I digress.
I'll only speak for mine. Right.
Ted Hawk, bless him, instituted the word chaotic, which was that chaos and order, chaotic comes together. And so I've got to ask you, and everyone needs to know, and how crucial a skill sense making is within the construct of the frameworks that you're bringing into the book. And so, as you introduce sense making as this core skill around flexible leadership, um, anyone that wants to utilize Snowden's Kevin and bring it in a way that makes it crystal clear without Snowden taking your head off online or anywhere, is a warrior. That's you. That's the blessing that you
Listen, I'm
bring
going to
to
have him on. We're doing a launch day event, and he's going to be my guest. And I was honored that he would. I said, "Here's the book.
us.
Will you join us?" I mean, he is an incredibly smart guy.
Oh
Uh,
yes.
and I'm super excited I'm going to have the chance to talk to him about it. And maybe he's coming on to say I've got it all wrong. But I think fundamentally what I've tried to do is I think that his work is sort of really helps think about really, really big things, right? And for organizations to think about really, really big things and countries to think about really, really big things. And I'm trying to take some of those ideas and help us get our arms around them as an individual leader, day to day, week to week, year to year, as we're doing our work as a leader. And that's what I've tried to do here.
Well, and you have, but what you're making the case in the book is that bad or poor decisions are an outcome of leaders misinterpreting complex situations and problems for simple ones. So unpack that for me as you layer on sense making and Kevin within flexible leadership.
Yeah, so I wish I would have thought of this before the book was finished. You and I were having a conversation before we hit record about the book writing process. And sometimes the things that you come up with later, like, I wish that was in the book. Here's what I wish was in the book.
Fair,
Like,
fair.
if you're leading, someone comes into your office and asks a question or wants some advice, there's a leadership moment here for you, and in your head, you're about ready to give an answer or give some advice or give some direction. That's fine. But in your head, you're saying, well, it depends. Or you even say, well, what we should do, well, it depends. If you have the it depends moment, you already know that the context isn't clear.
Mm.
You already know, well, it could be two or three other things, or there's probably a bunch of strings pulling on this, or there's several things like, or another thing I talk about in the book is that we need to think about organizations as more than just machines, but as organisms, which
Mhm.
means that there's all of these connected pieces, right? And so it's important, I think, for us to realize, especially if in the moment that we think it depends, like, what does it depend on?
Mm.
And sometimes we can suss out what it depends on. And then I would call that, and Snowden would call that, a complicated context, right? That it's complicated. We need to get some more perspectives. We need to get some other expertise. We need to bring more things together to look at it. And we may not be able to come with a single course of action or the right one, but we can make better educated guesses, and we can probably find the stuff to help us make better educated guesses. Awesome. But what if we don't even know what we don't know? What if there are unknowns that are unknown? What if that's what Snowden and now I would call complex. And that's where we're at a lot of the time. Let's take a simple example. And, 5 years ago-ish, as we're having this conversation, it was about the time when everything closed down and we sent everybody home because of the virus, right? This is back 5 years ago, Corona was still beer, right? And then we had lockdowns and we had all this other stuff, and we figured out how to do work. There were flexors involved in that too, but we figured out how to do work, and then that ended. Where it wasn't really the health issue that it had been before, and so people started thinking about what they should do, and so people started saying we're going to have return to office policies, and a policy is implying that it's a clear there's one thing that will cover everything and it will solve it. And policies are designed and work best in clear context.
Yeah.
This was not a clear context.
Yeah.
And so whatever people's policy was, it had all kinds of unintended consequences, didn't it? Like, it doesn't matter what your policy was. You had all kinds of unintended consequences. which means we tried to create a policy in a complex context, and we'd have been better off to do a bunch of pilots, try a bunch of stuff, or even to say we have something that works for this group, we have something that works for this group in Ottawa, and something works for this group in Omaha, something that works for this group that's in sales, something that works for this group in customer service, like whatever. Like, it's far more complex than just our whole company is going to do this one thing. And yet, if we try to, and there's good reasons why people did what they did, and I'd be happy to give people grace for many of those decisions. And yet, fundamentally, if we look at it at a high enough level, what happened was we tried to treat it like it was, oh, it's like it used to be again, so we can just go back and we can create a new policy based on the way we used to know it. The world of work will never be the way we used to know it. It changed in a week, forever.
Well, you've written then about this alignment where maybe we're not assessing context as well as we ought to be as leaders, and then jumping to decision and action, which your example of the pandemic is good because, again, yes, it was a crisis, but if you just sort of lift and shift that into regular work, non-pandemic related, if
Right.
we're not assessing and providing the time in which to what I call marinate in the moment before taking that decision and action, we can actually help the outcome and the after effect far greater than if we're so myopic and rely on past solutions, rely on past leadership, rely on that habitual habit that we have to go one way as opposed to step back and look, oh, what if? And that's what I love about your book is that it's very panoptic and obviously very flexible in reshaping how leaders need to be thinking. So I guess what's the mistake? I.e., what's the common biggest whatever mistake that we're making? Is it jumping in too quickly, Kevin? Is it without context? Is it relying on past habits? I'm curious of your
I
thoughts.
think the biggest mistake is people not realizing that they need to be more intentional. Excuse me, realizing that they don't need to be more intentional.
Hmm.
Like if we don't get the intent, it's the first question you asked. And if people don't have the sense that maybe my natural, habitual, learned response, that maybe it might not be best. If we're willing to be intentional enough to take a moment, and it might only be a moment, right? It might be a moment, it might be a minute, it might be an hour, it might be till next Tuesday, but it might be longer. But what I'm suggesting is the tension on fast and slow,
Hmm.
right? The
Yeah.
tension between fast and slow. And if we lean into fast thinking, then there's so many things in our world that push us towards urgency, some of which is manufactured, much of which is manufactured. If you look at the leaders that you would probably look up to the most and being highly effective, even though they're probably decisive, that doesn't necessarily mean that they make every decision immediately. Or even if it looks like they did, guess what? They probably didn't. And so I would say the first key is awareness and then intention to say, wait a minute, maybe not.
So it also requires new thinking. It requires new habits. You come up with mindset, skill set, habit set. So let's tackle each one of those three, Kevin. So mindset, skill set, habit set. What
I've
are they
been,
and why are they
yeah,
important?
I've been talking about those. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I've been talking about those three things for a long time, and that is how I framed the book.
Yeah.
And so we've talked really in this conversation about a lot about mindsets. Where we started, it's what I was just talking about, like being aware that perhaps I need to think about this differently. That maybe the styles have been helpful to me, but are getting in my way now. Like there's mindset there. There's the mindset of both and versus either or. There's
Mm.
there's a bunch of stuff that we've talked about that I would say isn't really skill. It's mindset. And if you don't get that stuff right, then it doesn't matter what I teach you or what you hear on this show or what you read in the book about the skills, because they won't align, they won't make sense. And even if you can intellectually understand those skills, you won't apply them. These two things have to match up. If they don't, we got no shot. And then we can build skills, right? You can listen to a podcast and you can get some ideas about a new skill. You can read about it in a book. You can take a workshop, and that's skill. And that how many times have you left a workshop left a podcast, put down the book with a smile on your face, big ideas in your head, and you were excited about what you were going to do. And then how many times 3 weeks later had you done the big old zero? Right? So that's habit set, right? Mindset has to align with the skill set. But if the skill set, if we don't build it, if we don't cross the knowing doing gap, then the skills that you have now acquired and put in your tool on your tool belt are rusty or dusty. And we won't pick them out. We'll kind of go back and look at them longingly once in a while, maybe feel guilty that we haven't done something with them, which doesn't help us either. So we have to think about how do we change the habit. And the first habit I think we have to change is to say, maybe I ought to think about other ways that I could do it in this moment. Like what this happens in a meeting. Now I'm going to get very like tactical. Like something happens in a meeting. What do I normally do? Well, maybe that's not what I should do. Maybe what should I, this meeting is different than the other 5 meetings where it worked. Maybe this is a different group. Maybe this is a whole group of introverts.
Mm.
Oh, I probably ought to flex. I probably need to do this a little differently here. Maybe this is a group of people that I've never met. Like we could go on and on with the scenario, but the scenario then says, does that beg me or urge me or prompt me to flex as opposed to just doing what I always naturally do? That's the heart of this whole idea.
I think we met probably a decade ago at an ATD event, and I had just put out my second book called The Purpose Effect. And what I was pleased and delighted, and obviously quite aligned with you to read, is that you write being a flexible leader doesn't mean flip-flopping or that people won't have a sense of where you're coming from. A flexible leader is purposeful and prioritizes based on purpose. People will recognize and appreciate that. So let's end with sort of that summary note of yours and really what does it come down to that leaders need to evoke in order to become the flexible leader?
Well, think about why you're choosing to lead, right? You're probably trying to do 2 things at some level. You're trying to make a difference through the outcomes that you and your team reach. There's something that the outcomes that you're moving towards matter in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And you're probably at some level thinking about those folks that you have some responsibility for and wanting to help them be successful, have a healthy level of stress, and we could go around down the list. And by the way, I've just described another one of the flexors, outcomes and others. But I would guess that everyone that's listening would have some clear picture in their head about why doing this work matters. And I would suggest to you that if you're clear on that, if that is your talisman, if that is your compass, if your compass is focused in that direction, that you're not going to walk straight toward it. You're going to have to walk in a circuitous path. You have to be flexible in order to move there. And that just the way that you've always led, the world is not conspiring to be more and more like the way you've always led. Right? So if the world's changing, we're going to have to change. And we just need to do it intelligently and on purpose.
Well, you had me at hello, Kevin. Thank you for this. Thank you for the book. The book, of course, is Flexible Leadership, Navigating Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. Kevin Eikenberry, the founder and chief potential officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group. Where can we find out more about you and the book?
Well, if you can figure out how to spell my name, wherever you're looking at this podcast, you can see my name. I'm confident we spelled correctly. You can find me on LinkedIn. That'd be a great place to go. Of course, you can find our company at kevineikenberry.com. And specifically about the book, you can go and buy a copy wherever fine books are sold, I suppose. But here's the thing. If you're going to buy one, you should buy 2 because there's someone that you know that needs these ideas as well, or that you can walk along with you together and you can work on the habit set part of this together. So you can go to kevineikenberry.com/flexible to learn all about the book. And we've got bonuses at all sorts of levels of books that you would buy. But I'd strongly consider you buying at least 2. at an absolute minimum. But I also want to give you something for free. You don't have to buy anything. Go to kevineikenberry.com/gift. And there, we have made one of the master classes that I've created about building confidence in ourselves and others completely free because you listened to this conversation. So if you go to kevineikenberry.com/gift, we'll give you that we sell every day for $79. It's yours for free. There's some more stuff about the book there as well. The last word in the subtitle of the book is confidence. And
Mm.
everything we've talked about leads us to feeling that we are more competent and therefore more confident, even in a world that's uncertain and changing. So kevineikenberry.com/gift will get you all that.
Well, we'll put all those in the show notes. Thank you so much. I am certainly full of confidence in this particular book of yours and the pedigree that bestowed upon you and before you. You do such incredible work for so many different groups, individuals, and companies. Kevin, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for this. And yeah, flexible leadership, navigate uncertainty, and lead with confidence. Thanks for listening, watching, or tuning in to Leadership Now.
Thanks, Dan.